have Philipp Krüger from University of Geneva presenting the sustainability wage gap.
So I'd like to start by thanking the organizers for putting the paper on the program. So this is joint work with Daniel Metzger, who's at Erasmus University of Rotterdam, and Jackson Wu, who's at the Stockholm School of Economics. And the starting point for this paper is really this idea that perhaps one reason for why firms engage in sustainability activities, or why they invest in ESG policies, is that this might allow these firms to attract more talented workers. Okay? Perhaps because workers have explicit preferences for working for sustainable organizations. And therefore, accept to work for firms at lower wages. Now, this idea is not necessarily new, right? And it has been advocated a lot in management circles. So, for instance, in 2008 already, the MIT Stone Management Review ran a piece on how using CSR or sustainability could be a way to win the war for talent. Management commentators in Forbes, for instance, have highlighted that corporate social responsibility might help attracting top talent. And in another piece, they even go so far as to suggest that some workers, and in particular talented workers, might want to not only receive a paycheck, but also work for purposeful firms or organizations. Now, this idea, I think, is quite appealing, or this narrative. However, we think that there's relatively little large-scale empirical evidence backing this up. Okay, and this is really where we come in. Our paper and try to answer a relatively simple research question, which is whether workers or employees in general, so we don't have white collar workers in mind, so we have employees in mind, whether they actually value the sustainability of the organizations they work for. And we get at this question kind of from two different angles. Okay, so first of all, we're kind of interested in really establishing like some correlations, if you will, or partial correlations. Looking at whether more sustainable firms actually pay lower wages, and then kind of fixing talent, or holding fixed talent. And then there's kind of a related or a reverse hypothesis here, which would be, fixing a wage. Do we observe that more sustainable firms are better at attracting and retaining talented workers? Okay, so this is really what this paper is about. So I really have to watch time because I don't want to go over time. Now, let me quickly outline how I'd like to structure today's talk, and also give you some of the main takeaways in case I lose you, or I actually don't manage time well enough. So I'll first talk a bit about how we measure sustainability in this paper, and specifically we focus on one sub-dimension of sustainability, namely the environmental sustainability of organizations or firms. And to do so, we propose a novel and survey-based measure at the sector level. Okay, and we focus really on the sector level here, because we think that workers can form meaningful beliefs about the sustainability of a sector. Okay, it might be more complicated doing that at the firm level, but we also have firm level tests. I'll then talk a bit about the data we use in this paper, because I think we have very interesting data, not only on wages, but also on talent. And then I'll present some of the main results or main takeaways. workers. And so what we document in this paper is that firms that operate in the most environmentally sustainable sectors tend to pay about 10% lower wages than otherwise to otherwise similar workers. And so we coined this wage differential or wage gap, the sustainability wage gap. So essentially, workers that work for firms in the most sustainable sectors, they earn less than otherwise similar workers. We then explore sort of heterogeneity in this effect by looking at the most educated and most highly skilled workers. And we find that this sustainability wage gap is more pronounced for the most highly skilled workers. They seem to care even more about the sustainability of the employees they work for. And we also document that the sustainability wage gap is more pronounced in more recent periods. And then finally, we also show that firms that operate in high sustainability sectors are also better at retaining and attracting high skilled workers. Now, if I have time at the end, I'll also discuss some alternative explanations and threats to identification that we carry out. Now, let me jump into how we measure sustainability. So as I said, we focus on the environmental component of sustainability, and mainly because we think that this is an intuitive dimension workers understand. And so what we do in this paper, we use a survey instrument to classify industrial sectors or economic activities in terms of their environmental sustainability. And more specifically, we ask bachelor students in economics and management to classify economic activities. So we ask them to, so we give them a set of sectors and ask them to classify them from being environmentally sustainable to being environmentally unsustainable. Okay, so we code sustainable answers or sustainable responses with a 5 and unsustainable sectors with a 1. We always allow for a do not know response because sometimes it's difficult classifying these sectors. And then what we do is we take sector averages, so essentially using all the survey responses for a given sector to calculate the consensus view on a given economic sector as to whether this sector is environmentally sustainable or not. And this is sort of what you get. So in terms of the most sustainable sectors, you get sectors such as education, health, recycling, or social work. Okay, so arguably sectors that, like I would at least think are sustainable from an environmental perspective. And if you look at the other tail, or at the other tail of the distribution, the lowest rated sectors are those related to fossil fuel energy sources, production involving chemicals, and air transport. So we think that this measure, so this survey-based classification, captures meaningful beliefs about the environmental or sustainability of sectors. Now, let me quickly say something on the wage and talent data we have. So essentially, we use data from Sweden for the entire Swedish worker population between 2001 and 2017. So we have very standard labor data, such as the wage of individuals, their gender, their age, their potential experience, their years of education. But we also have very detailed data on the occupation, so the specific job that an individual has. So for instance, if that individual is working as a secretary, engineer, manager, so we have occupation data. But I think most importantly, we even observe their cognitive and non-cognitive skills. Okay, so these data come from military enlistment tests, okay, for the male subpopulation. So in Sweden, the male population has to undergo both a cognitive and a non-cognitive intelligence test, which we observe. Okay, so we can control for the cognitive and non-cognitive skills of an individual, which you would think are important determinants of their wages. Now, let me illustrate some of the main finding in a graphical way. So what we do in this bin scatter plot here is we sort wages by the sustainability of the organization for which the specific workers work for. Okay, going from low sustainability to high sustainability. And then we calculate the average wage for each of these 20 sustainability bins. And what you can see here is there seems to be a considerable gap or difference between workers that work in the sectors with the lowest sustainability compared to the sectors with the highest sustainability. When we estimate more traditional wage regressions, so when we take the log of wages and regress them on a dummy variable that indicates the highest sustainability sectors, controlling for sort of more traditional determinants of wages, as well as our skills measures and year occupation fixed effects, we find that essentially workers, let's say otherwise similar workers that work in the sectors with the highest sustainability earn approximately 10% lower wages. Now, we estimate these regressions separately for women and men, mainly because the skills measures are a bit different. But we find very similar results when we look at the female subpopulation. Okay, so the women also earn less when they work. Let's say otherwise similar women also earn less when they work in more sustainable organizations. Now, in the next step, what we do is we explore the cross-section and time series of this sustainability wage gap. Okay, and so focusing first on the cross-section of talent, because I think there are reasons to believe that perhaps the most talented individuals have even stronger preferences for working for sustainable organizations. Okay, and so we do so by simply including an interaction term with between the sustainability measures and our measures of talent. And then we also explore the time series of this effect by including triple interactions. Okay, so looking at between our sustainability measure, talent measures, and the linear time trend. Okay, so to see whether this sustainability wage gap has become more important over time for the most talented individuals. Now, we think these tests that explore the cross-section and time series of the sustainability wage gap are important for two reasons. So first of all, we think that the hypothesis of whether the most talented individuals care even more about sustainability is interesting in its own right, because this carries very important policy implications for firms, right? So if firms can attract the most talented workers by giving them purpose, that's an important insight for firms. However, we also think that these tests exploring the cross-section and time series are important from an identification perspective. Okay? Because in these regressions, where we compare workers within the same firm, allows us to control for firm fixed effects. Okay? Now, we think that these tests exploiting the heterogeneity of these effects are also important, because any alternative explanation would also have to explain such heterogeneous effects. Now, what do we find in these two regressions? Essentially, we find that the sustainability wage gap is even larger or more pronounced, so in absolute terms, for more skilled individuals. Okay, so for university degree holders and for individuals that are in the highest skill group. Okay, so essentially among the 5% of workers with the highest cognitive and non-cognitive skills. We also find that this gap, or the sustainability wage gap for the highest skilled individuals, is increasing over time. Okay, so it has become more important over time. Now, when we look at the mirror image, so whether sustainability allows firms to attract and retain the most highly talented individuals, we also find evidence that the most talented workers are more likely to work in firms operating in more sustainable sectors, and they are also more likely to stay with their firms. Now, in the couple of minutes I have left now, I think 3.5, I'd like to talk a bit about identification. So we acknowledge that we don't have any exogenous variation in the form of a natural experiment or an instrument for our sustainability measure. However, we do control for important dimensions that are likely to have a first order impact on wages and that are typically unobservable to the researcher. So specifically, we can control for occupation year fixed effects, essentially comparing two individuals in the same occupation at the same time, but in two different sectors. And we can also control for the cognitive and non-cognitive abilities of the workers, which are arguably some of the most important determinants of wages. Now, as I said, we also study these heterogeneous effects, right, using these interaction terms. And we think any alternative explanation would also need to explain why the wage gap is more pronounced for the workers of the highest skilled and why they are increasing over time. Now, let me finish with a couple of additional tests that we carry out in this paper. So first of all, we control for other industry characteristics that might or might not be correlated with sustainability. So for instance, we control for firing risk. Okay, so the percentage, or let's say the likelihood that an individual loses his or her job at the industry level. Okay, we also control for health risk by looking at hospitalizations and sick days in the industry. And we also control for whether the sector is very compatible with family outcomes, okay, by looking at the extent to which workers in the industries are married or have children. So including all of these controls doesn't change our conclusions. Now, as additional tests, we also focus on a sample of full-time workers, okay, because the tests before included both part-time and full-time workers. And we also kind of restrict ourselves to occupations that exist in all industries. Okay, so essentially occupations that allow to more easily move across sectors. Again, our findings are robust to these tests. We also control for omitted factors at the worker level. So we estimate some specifications that include worker fixed effects. However, we think that there are methodological problems with this specification, because switching sectors is not necessarily random. However, in these regressions, we still find a significant sustainability wage gap. And then we go on and study cases where one could argue that the job switches are more exogenously induced, okay, by looking at job switches due to bankruptcies or large layoffs. Again, the sustainability wage gap is robust to these alternative tests. So I'm almost out of time. We also use standard ESG scores as our sustainability measure, as a robustness test. However, as these, and find a significant sustainability wage gap. However, these measures are only available for publicly listed firms and in most recent periods. Let me quickly conclude. So I think we provide evidence that employees value to work for environmentally sustainable companies and accept lower wages. So we think our research has very important insights for firms' competitiveness, given in particular because the sustainability wage gap is strongest for the highest skilled workers and is becoming more important over time. And so perhaps an important determinant of attracting millennials in Generation Z, which have arguably stronger sustainability preference. Now, we also think our research carries implications for firm value, which we discuss in the paper. I'm a bit over time. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion and your comments and questions.
Very good. Thank you, Philipp. The discussant is Mark Rowe from Harvard Law School.
So thanks, Claudia, and thanks to the organizers and Philipp for having me here as a commentator on this paper. It's a very nice paper, and one of the reasons for the thanks, I might not have read it as carefully had I not been set up to comment on the paper. So the thesis, as you just heard from Philipp, is sustainable firms are going to save on their labor costs, particularly save on the labor costs of their most skilled employees. And this idea, in some form or another, has been around in the sustainability literature and thinking and among sustainability activists for a little while. What Philipp and co-authors have done is they found a nice treasure trove of good data from Sweden, where they can test a lot of the things and a lot of the alternative hypotheses, possible omitted variables, and eliminate or reduce the likelihood of several of the most important ones. There are surveys about intentions. Do you really believe in sustainability? People can believe but not put their money where their mouth is. The authors are able to tie some aspects of intentions and beliefs with dollars on the line. What is the salary? Some other potential omitted variables that would probably occur to many people when looking at the project are the sustainable firms attracting less capable employees and then paying them less? Well, they've got some good information about cognitive ability, and they didn't call it social skills, but non-cognitive skills. They've got some good data on this, and the indication is these employees are not less talented. If anything, they're more talented. So what they've also got is they've got some nice independent evidence on cognitive and non-cognitive skills, which can significantly, largely eliminate this, reduce this as a probability. For management people, there's also a potential message here. Sustainable firms are going to do well. They've got better flow, and a lot of cash flow is coming from paying high quality employees less than they have to pay if the firm were less or not sustainable. So the simple message for management is there's an opportunity out there. Become a more sustainable firm, and it's not going to be just the cost structure of sustainability, but the saving structure of reducing your labor costs. And this could end up being a not a cost sector, but a profit opportunity. The interpretation, the author's interpretation makes a whole lot of intuitive sense. People get significant value from their associations. And if the association is one that people truly prefer, they'll put their money where their mouth is and take a lower salary, even though they're productive. And there's a whole series of concentric good news messages. It's better for the employees. They're happier, even though they're slightly less well paid. It's better for the firm. If enough firms do this, it's better for the environment. Among sustainability activists, as I'm reading some of the literature, the tone of the paper might not be as positive as some of the sustainability activists would like it. In that the channel that's making the sustainability work for the firms is lower wages. And for some, I think, significant portion of the sustainability movement in the United States, the goal is we want the firm to be sustainable, and sustainability, whoops, sorry about that. And sustainability means better wages, not worse wages. Sweden might be different from the United States on this. And the relevant employee base that Philipp and co-authors are looking at are mostly professionals, talented workers. They're not minimum wage $7.25 an hour employees. But still, the overall tone in some significant portion of the sustainability activism in the United States is this isn't going to be built on employees' backs. It's going to be some sort of a win-win situation. And if it's anybody who pays, it's not going to be employees. So just to sharpen the tonal aspect of this, doesn't take away from any of the findings. I think a lot of sustainability people would be unhappy with this result. That the goal is, well, if the firm looks more carefully at its supply chain to pick out bad inputs who are exploiting employees in a nasty sort of way, they're going to get a better, more stable supply chain. Not that the workers are going to be part of those who are going to pay for the sustainability. Or the value is going to come from Patagonia being able, because it's a sustainable, environmentally friendly firm, being able to charge a premium price to well-to-do consumers and not a hit to workers' pay. And if anybody pays, it's going to be capital, because sustainable-oriented investors are willing to take a little bit less on capital returns than they would otherwise. And the message could be, a positive one for the analysis, which is there's no free lunch. Somebody has to pay for this somewhere along the line, and it works out that there are talented employees who are willing to essentially pay for the environmental friendliness of the firm. Some alternative abilities to work out that to eliminate, and that maybe the data would allow them to be eliminated. One possibility is, are there just a lot of millennial workers with high IQs, high skills, so they take a lower wage? Is there a supply issue going on? There's also, talented workers in the paper prefer sustainability more and are more willing to accept lower wages. Seems plausible, but you kind of wonder whether the talent correlation with sustainability, how strong it is. That is, a lot of people have preferences independent of their talent, and you could imagine just that preference for sustainable firms is independent of talent and hence pay structure. It just works out very nicely for the paper that there is this correlation. Seems to be some causality aspects, which the paper picks up quickly and deals with. Good firms seem to share the wealth, and one possible reverse causality issue is firms that have good results are willing to spend some of their results on more sustainable operations. And here the authors have a nice sharp response. This shouldn't result in lower wages, and it seems to be resulting in lower wages. If it's sustainability that's if it's good results, firm with rents, that's causing the sustainability, well, that shouldn't hit wages, may even lead higher wages. There's a significant literature that firms with rents end up paying higher wages to their employees, and this is the reverse, suggesting that the good results are coming from the lower wages. They might be able to get at this a little bit more specifically. They've got some HHI data, and while the IO people say HHI, the index of concentration, is not the be-all and end-all of understanding whether we've got market power and significant rents, it's a beginning, and the data's there. Perhaps they've run it, so it could be interesting to check what's the market structure of the industries in which the wages are lowest and the sustainability is highest. Are they firms with high rents? And if they are firms with high rents, there might be more work to exclude that as a driver. There's another aspect of this, which I'm not a partisan of, but it's a significant aspect in this literature. And the other aspect is, what could be happening is we're simultaneously getting firms or sectors that have noticeable monopoly and monopsony power. So monopsony could be doing some of the work that the authors are finding in terms of lower wages. So you can see the bare bones version. Firm or an industry is monopolistically organized, oligopolistically organized, and it's able to garner significant rents because it's monopoly organized. If the market power extends to the labor market and it has a monopsony or some monopsony power, then it could be simultaneously raising the price of its product and lowering the cost of its labor inputs. Now, I'm not particularly sympathetic to the monopsony explanation that's been running around in the United States. I think most of it is explained by a loss over the last 2 or 3 decades of labor rents for different reasons. But the idea is out there, and it's persuaded a lot of people, and it looks like the authors have some of the data that could test this this alternative. But just to give it another slight spin, if there's monopsony power in a lot of the tech industries because, say, there are just a lot of people who only want to do tech and can't do anything else. Well, in the labor economics, there is frequently a surplus from matching the employee's skill with the firm's needs. That gets split in different ways in the labor literature. If there's a monopsony firm, that surplus is going to be disproportionately obtained by the firm and not by the employees. So one thing to eliminate. A question that I had running through the paper, maybe it's there, I didn't see it, is just as informational. What's the size of what's going on? Is there a way to ascertain whether each dollar of savings in employee costs leads to $1 in profit or $1 in sustainable expenses? Or is there a gap between the two? Is some of the employee cost savings being lost somewhere? By one, and I have it here, very, very back of the envelope calculation, the amounts are potentially that the paper is uncovering are quite large. So in the median firm in one set, 1/3 of the costs are in wages. The paper, Philipp's presentation actually undersold some of the findings, and some of the findings are that the wage savings are in the order of 10 to 20%, not just 10%. Little uncertain as to whether they're for all employees in the industry or the firm, or only the targeted talented. But take it if it's all, and Philipp will know whether it's only half or some fraction. But if it's all, that means the firm is losing 3% to 6% of total costs are being reduced by being a sustainable firm that can pay employees less. 3 to 6% of total cost is a substantial amount, on average, whatever, 4.5%. For firms that are selling things and making profits of 5% of revenues, this is a very big number. And so one of the curiosities coming away from the paper is it really this big? Is it a smaller number? If it is this big, where is it going? How much is going into sustainable expenses? How much of it is going into increased profits? How much of it is being burnt up along the way? Package deal. And the authors, I call it a package deal, the authors have a different vocabulary, are employees taking a lower salary because they're getting other benefits elsewhere in their employment package. The authors have a bunch of things, job turnover, productivity and the like, that are suggesting that the employees that are taking a lower salary are not making it back elsewhere in their package. Still, you could think of some things that don't get that aren't tested. Is it hours worked? Are people getting, are able to work in the sustainable industry 40 hours a week instead of 50 hours a week? Is the nature of the firm different in a way that is privately beneficial to the employee? And here I'd want to talk about this for a minute or two. So does environmentally sound mean good for me as somebody who lives in the neighborhood but doesn't work at the firm? And does it also mean good for the employees, but not in the social psychological sense of feeling good about working at an environmentally sound firm, but working atmosphere? And by working atmosphere, I don't just mean the interpersonal relationships, but the atmosphere itself. So if you're working at an environmentally sound firm, you're less likely to have to breathe in the fumes of an environmentally unsound manufacturer. So Phil put this up, and let me put it up again. So the sustainable firms, the 10 most sustainable up on top, the 10 least sustainable on the bottom. And let me highlight a little bit. So for the sustainable firms, education, physical well-being, maybe that's working at a gym, recreation, sports activities, cultural activities, R&D, human health, medicine, I guess, legal, accounting. So these are sustainable industries. The bottom 10 for sustainable, the least sustainable industries are disproportionately manufacturing and mining, extraction of crude petroleum, mining of uranium, manufacture of textile, manufacture of chemicals. You could imagine that among people choosing their job, they look at firms in these different sectors and they say, well, if I go work at a firm, a manufacturer, look at all that stuff that I got to breathe in every day. There's a potential sustainability benefit in that the firm pollutes less, but at least I could imagine some employees saying, I don't care about what happens to the environment, global warming, climate change, or the like. I just don't want to breathe that stuff in when I'm working from 9 to 5 or 8 to 6. And this, I guess, potential omitted variable, it correlates with environmentally unsustainable firms, but the motivation could be different. It's not that I feel good socially and psychologically working at a pro-social ESG firm. I just feel good for my own selfish sense of, I don't want to breathe this stuff every day. It has a potential social benefit in that I demand a premium wage, which makes, internalizes a little bit of the externalities, but it's not my principal motivation. Instead, what I'd rather do is work in the environment on the right, and I don't ask for a premium wage if I'm working in the environment on the right, because a clean workplace is the kind of workplace that I want. At least possible, and probably something to eliminate from the as one of the possibilities. Do some people just like a clean work environment for its own selfish reasons? Few other things. This just with words. So the 10 most sustainable industries are including education, social work, health, veterinary. So, here we are today, educators, and I know I can't speak for everybody in the Zoom room, but when I was thinking of whether I wanted to become a professor or not, mostly the thought was, and I suspect this maps on thinking of a very large portion of the people on the Zoom meeting today, was not that this is a sustainable industry, but if somebody's actually going to pay me to read books, write a little bit, and then go talk to colleagues and students about what I've just read, I can't believe that people will actually pay me to do that. And it's just a superior job to, my next best in terms of skills, which is probably working in one of those factories. So, question, is it a taste for this kind of work as opposed to a taste for ESG? It might be very hard to untangle. Another question, which really isn't needed for the paper, but it's just something that I think will occur to readers' minds when going through. It looks like there's a lot of demand for ESG-oriented workspaces. People want this and want this so much, the paper is saying, that they'll take a pay cut, which then raises this question: why is it that we don't have mandated ESG results? That is, for a fair amount of the corporate effort to do more ESG is a sensibility that environmental regulation is not as strong as it should be. But if there's so many people who are willing to take a pay cut to be associated with a firm that's doing ESG, what's holding the polity back from simply mandating more of that ESG? Is it old people who aren't ESG oriented, who are forming enough of a political roadblock? Is it something else that's going on? There seems to be a too low a response in the polity for what seems to be a high response in the workplace. A couple of other questions which are really going beyond the paper. It's not something the authors have to handle, although it comes up here and there. External validity. The main evidence is from Sweden. Question is, does it travel outside of Sweden? It's very plausible that it does, but maybe Sweden is different. Maybe the social and value system of Swedish professionals and people with talent is different. Another possibility is that other Swedish institutions are different. I can think of a couple that might have an impact. I'll tell you what, marginal tax rate. So, and here, I'm not a tax lawyer, and I did not consult the actual tax sources. I just went to online sources. Marginal tax rate in Sweden seems to be in the vicinity of 60%. The marginal tax rate on income in the United States is in the vicinity of 40%. And it looks like the higher Swedish rate kicks in faster than the higher US rate. So here it's approximately a 20% difference. So if I'm working in Sweden and thinking, am I going to give up some of my salary for ESG benefits, either personal or public, I calculate that that's only going to cost me, depending on my salary, 40 cents of each dollar that I give up after taxes. In the United States, it's going to cost me 60 cents of each dollar. And closely related to that is, and here I may just not have a good enough sense of Sweden. I'm extrapolating from other European countries, that of public social value is greater in a lot of other countries than in the States. In the United States, you kind of got to get it into your take-home pay, or you don't get the benefit. In a lot of other European societies, you can get that from public provision. Stable. Is the result stable? There's a related paper in the legal literature that might be worth looking at. It's a very similar thesis by Barzuza, Curtis, and Weber, which is along the lines that younger people now in the United States are much more attuned to climate change. And in their thesis, they're bringing it to their investment portfolio. And these two papers fit together, I think quite nicely. A question that occurs is, how permanent is this? In that millennials, younger people, their value system might lead them to take a hit to their investment returns today. That's the Barzuza, Curtis, Weber thesis, or the thesis of this paper, take a hit at the office in terms of salary, but for similar reasons. It's their value system says, I'm just not going to be associated with a polluting firm. Question is, how stable is this over the next several decades? When the millennials finally have capital of their own, will they not reverse their priorities, but change their priorities? And so things that were deal breakers when they were 26 are just considerations when they're 46. I don't know. If they do change their values, it wouldn't be the first generation that did that. Looking around at the faces on the screen, I see Henry. I see a couple of other people that I see Jeffrey Gordon of the 60s generation, but there was certainly a sense in the 60s that as soon as we're in charge of things, the whole world will be different among a lot of my peers. Well, the 60s generation grew up and didn't really change things. And it's more the 60s generation that changed than that the world changed from the value system of the 60s generation of their values in the 1960s. Is this going to be true for the millennials and Gen Zs that are part of this paper? I don't know, but at least put a question mark there. So conclusion, I think they get a lot of stuff that's important in that they drill down deeper than I've seen otherwise on where ESG value is coming from. They've got a good set of data. They're able to eliminate or reduce the likelihood of several alternative hypotheses. Interpretation, as I said at the beginning, it's not the goal of at least one substantial segment of sustainable activists to make employees pay for the sustainability. People want it to come out of something, to be paid for somewhere else. And what the authors are finding is kind of a no free lunch story, which is it's being redistributed from employees with high environmental tastes in their interpretation to environmental betterment. Alternative to look at is that while this seems to be some of the effect in that we're getting less of this because employees are willing to take a hit and pay for less of this, it might be that at least some of the employees, maybe a lot of the employees, are just looking to avoid this, a personal cost, and prefer a different, cleaner work environment for themselves, regardless of what they think about for the rest of the world.
Thank you, Mark. Philipp, would you like to respond? And
I would like to respond.
we have a few questions.
So I'd just like to respond by thanking Mark for this great discussion. I mean, it's like I can't respond to all of the points, and I mean, obviously, it would be great if you could send us the slides, and then we can digest all of these comments. Perhaps I just pick one of them. I mean, it was also the last one you brought up about this motivation, right? The selfish motivation versus the altruistic motivation. I mean, it's true that we cannot really distinguish that, but I think it's not necessarily important for our paper, right? To ultimately explain why they choose to work for sustainable companies or in more sustainable sectors, right? I agree that it might be different from an interpretation perspective, but I think it's not. I mean, whether you decide to work for Patagonia, because you want to work in a nicer environment, or because because of selfish reasons, or because you think that Patagonia is a great company that furthers environmental sustainability. I mean, yeah, of course, we don't know, right? But I think for us, it's not necessarily a problem. I mean, a lot of your points, they're great, so we'll discuss them, or we'll see what we can do. I mean, there's obviously things we cannot do, and we will acknowledge that. And yeah, thanks a lot for the discussion. Maybe some questions.
Yeah, let's perhaps get some questions from the audience, and I'll just collect the questions, and maybe you can just wrap up by answering.
Yeah, I
can them together with
maybe from the chat. Maybe there was Holger Sparman. So it's right that it's correct that our measure is an industry measure, but we also have tests with traditional ESG scores at the firm level, and we get similar results there. So I guess in terms of the management implications, I think the firm level evidence, which I haven't presented today, would be more relevant, but we find similar effects there. Now, we don't use that measure in the main tests because it's a much smaller sample because of being limited to publicly listed companies. Now, Tobias, he asked about the population of survey subjects. This is something we're looking into right now. We want to redo the survey, using sort of a broader population of individuals, and perhaps also getting at that question of the correlation between talent and preferences for sustainability. Maybe to pick up one other comment from Mark's discussion, we're also thinking about more things we can do to control for at the industry level, right? I mean, kind of to rule out alternative explanations. Now, the point by Varghese on lower wages in sustainable industries is the expectations for higher wages in the future. This is also something we discussed, and we're currently thinking about how to address it. It's a possibility. Historically, we don't see that, right? In the whole sample. So we don't see that. Let's say let's say individuals who start out working in a sustainable sector, in the future, kind of get ahead of in terms of wages, in terms of the unsustainable sectors, right? But there's probably more we can do there. Maybe some other questions. Oh, sorry, there's still other questions.
Yeah, maybe we can go Charlotte, then Nick, then Roberta. I'm just following the order on my screen.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Charlotte, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Thanks. Interesting paper. But there was one thing I wasn't sure how to think about, right? So you're asking the question whether people are willing to work for less because they get these non-pecuniary benefits. But how should I think about, how do you guys think about people's outside opportunities? Because so what I had in mind was that, so if you have a finance degree, you can find work in many different sectors, including the finance sector, which pays quite a lot, right? But if I have a degree in education, it's going to be much harder for me to find work in the finance sector or in the manufacturing, mining sector, right? So it seems to me that there's something about outside opportunities and where you actually can choose between different jobs that is really hard to think about, in particular in the part of the analysis where you're sort of focusing on industries rather than within industries.
So I agree with you, but I think we can get at that where we restrict ourselves to certain occupations that are more transferable. So we have like some tests where we look at how dispersed is an occupation across sectors, okay, and then we limit the analysis to those occupations that are highly dispersed, right? Where you would think that people can move across sectors, right? So and then we still find that let's say an individual working in like a job like a secretary, for instance, still earns less in low sustainability versus a high sustainability test. So I agree, maybe in the baseline test, outside opportunities play a role, but I mean we control for these occupation fixed effects, and then we even restrict the sample to those occupations which we think should be like where there's a lot of outside opportunities. Hope that answers the question.
Nick, do you want to ask your question now?
So Philipp, great paper. Basically, I had the same question as Charlotte, but I have a different suggestion. So maybe you can, instead of using occupation, maybe you can focus on skills, in the sense that there's some papers that, for example, use let's say IT skills, management skills, and so on. Some of them, like IT skills, are very transferable, while some other skills are not. And so there's some categories and some classifications which make it quite easy, and it's I think slightly better than occupation, because the type of occupation might be the same, but actually it's the skills that may vary. And so that could be just a
interesting point, right? I mean, like using the talent distribution, but like I probably also would have to explain the whole like occupation fixed effects a bit better. I mean, they're quite granular. They might actually capture something like IT, and it's true. Like instead of taking sort of a kind of an agnostic view, just looking how they are dispersed, one could actually look at let's say like along your lines, which are occupations which are very transferable, and then use it as
something. Yeah,
that's a nice suggestion. Thanks.
Roberta, do you want to go next, please?
So I had a suggestion. So I was concerned, similarly to one of Mark's point about the riskiness, since the top 10 and the top 10 in both sections, there's a big difference in risk. You could sort of put something in like what for your public companies, stock volatility. If you have accounting data for the private and the others, you could look at the riskiness across time of their return on assets or things like that, and to control for that, because one would expect if the sustainable industries are less risky, their salaries presumably would. Lots of papers look at a risk. You could also maybe just use Viscusi's risk premium and how that compares, because he had these data about riskier industry people got higher wages.
That's a good point, but maybe I should clarify as well. We have controls for the industry level risk, right? We look at accident rates, and hospitalizations of the workers at the industry level, time varying, right? And so I guess that's like an even better measure for risk, right? I mean, and actually, I think that also addresses kind of a lot of these points on, do we prefer a safe versus, an unsafe work environment? And we have these as controls, very granular controls, right? How many.
So do you, how does that difference, the 10%, how does that compare to the premium of Viscusi's work and others, right? For those,
I mean,
even if you're controlling, you might be putting that in as a variable, but that's still not telling you the magnitude of your differential and how that compares to what they would get if you
So you're thinking about like
as a risk.
interaction, you're thinking like of an interaction effect then, right? I mean,
Yes.
Yeah, we could look at that. We could, but I think like the important point here is that essentially the premium in itself that we calculate is almost unchanged when we control for, you know, sick days, hospitalizations, you know, kind of.
Right, I understand that, but I'm just saying, sort of, I think that was the magnitude you're finding was about the magnitude of the risk premium in Viscusi's work, although I haven't looked at it, I didn't re-look at it.
Happy to.
And so that would be the thing that you want to.
I completely agree. So I think we can, like, you know, do a lot more in like looking at these interactions and like how does it compare to other industry characteristics. So I'll be like, I didn't catch the name of that reference.
I'll put it into the chat.
Awesome.
Viscusi.
That's awesome. Yeah, so we'll have a look at that. Thanks.
Fantastic. Philip, I think there is just a couple of questions from not the panelists, but the participants. So David is asking, I wonder if in addition to the positive pro-social aspects of ESG, you may be observing fear of cancel culture, fear of being associated with a stigmatized firm or industry, and then would it be possible, so that's Mustafa, would it be possible to assume some of the results being driven by selection bias, the population surveyed are subject to fairly similar admission process?
I'll do the second one first. I mean, one could think so, but I mean, we're looking into this, right? You know, using different survey populations. Personally, I don't think it's going to move much, but I mean, it's a point we don't know yet. Like, yeah, of course. I mean, David, it might be some of this, but again, I think that's not necessarily a problem for us, right? Because, you know, like, let's say workers, because they don't want to be stigmatized, like, you know, be working in these industries, select, right? I mean, kind of, we're trying to, so I think like, goes a bit the comments of Mark, like, you know, why is this because individuals don't want to breathe, you know, unhealthy at the workplace, or because of altruistic motivations or other motivation? I mean, that's a super tough question to get at. I think what we're trying to say is that, look, you know, if you look at revealed preferences, like, you know, of individuals, I mean, they seem to be selecting in these kind of ways, right? So, I mean, why they care about this? I mean, we don't want to go there, right? I mean, it's like super difficult to answer, but I mean, it seems to be the case, just looking at archival wage data, that, you know, like people select in these ways, and, you know, accordingly earn lower wages. I think that's, maybe I didn't highlight this enough. So this is kind of the main point we want to make.